food and it took me longer than I expected. I apologize profusely.
No worries.
All right. So we are going to talk about fair market rents, rent reasonableness, correct?
Yeah, and okay, so the recording has started. Yes.
Okay. So we're going to start off. What do you all know about fair market rents so far? I don't want to tell you things that you already know.
So Colin, I'm gonna jump in here because our primary housing case manager is having technical issues and can't join this call. And we have two case managers with us, Hunter and E, who are both new to housing case management and to HUD stuff. But what I will say that we understand is basically limited to where in the application it says what the rate is for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom. That is kind of where my brain knowledge has ended at this point with it.
Okay, fair enough. What do you know, Casey, about rent reasonableness?
I know there is a process to follow to establish rent reasonableness, but I have never myself used it.
Okay, cool. So let me pulling up some stuff. So let's go through sort of what fair market rent is. We'll talk about rent reasonableness, and then we'll walk through a hypothetical housing situation so you can see kind of how it all gets calculated. Does that sound good to you all?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Before we get started, though, Hunter is new to their case management role at the center, and I would love for y'all to just briefly introduce yourselves so that they kind of know who we're talking to today, and then give just a second to introduce themselves as well.
Very good. I can start. I'm Colin Davis. I'm the manager of the homeless system with the city of Durham. Lloyd, Ruby. Go.
There's my camera. Good afternoon, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler. I am a senior community development analyst in the Department of Community Development. I largely manage the Continuum of Care annual competition and pull the collaborative application together. Ruby?
Hi, I'm Ruby Holmes. I'm the homeless system analyst with the homeless services team in community development.
Hunter, are you able to introduce yourself right now, or do you need some time?
No, I can introduce myself. Hi, I'm Hunter. I'm the health case manager for the center. I just started, this is probably my 3rd week, so everything is very, very new.
And Hunter comes to us. Hunter has actually been at the center since 2019, just in a different capacity. But they come to us with a public health background and sex education background and do a lot of health related work in the community as it relates to LGBTQ folks. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Welcome, Hunter.
Thank you. Thank you
your new role. Your new role.
Yes.
So I think we're cool to go forward with what rent reasonableness is, Colin.
All right, so let's start. We'll start talking about fair market rent, and then we'll get into rent reasonableness. I'll show you where you can find some of this data, and I'll put a link in the chat to the website itself because the fair market rent gets adjusted by HUD annually. So HUD publishes every year for every city or metro statistical area what they consider to be the fair market rent in that region for everything from an efficiency to, I believe it goes out to like a 6-bedroom unit. And then there's a mathematical formula that if you rent more than 5 or 6 bedrooms, how you calculate what the new fair market rent is for those additional bedrooms. The fair market rent is set annually, and it takes effect at the beginning of each federal fiscal year. So you're going to have to keep that in mind because you're starting your rapid rehousing program now. So you're going to have any leases that are signed between now and October 1st will fall under one fair market rent standard. Leases starting October 1st till September 30th of 2023 will fall on a different fair market rent standard. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So the fair market rent is what's considered a gross rent. And that gross rent is what the rent is that's on your apartment, on your rental unit, how much you pay the landlord, plus a utility allowance. And that utility allowance is determined sort of through the public housing authority. So Durham Housing Authority creates the rental allowance, and that rental allowance gets calculated by looking at what is the fuel source in the house. Is it a gas heat? Is it propane heat? Is it electric heat? Is there an air conditioner? Refrigerator gets a certain amount, trash, water, what type of house is in here. So you add up all these things, and we're going to walk through that in a moment with the hypothetical. So when you add those utility allowances up, you might have $250 of utilities. And that $250 of utilities has to be added to whatever the landlord says needs to be paid in rent. The only exception would be if some of those utilities are included in the lease. So if the landlord says, you know what, electric is included, well, you wouldn't do the electrical calculations because that's already built into the cost of the rent.
Gotcha.
So let's say the landlord charges $1,000 a month for the unit, and the utility allowance is $250 a month. So you would be at 1,000 plus 250 gets you to $1,250 for that unit. If HUD says you can, fair market rent for this is $1,200, you're $50 over the rental rate, the fair market rate. So you have two options. One, you can sort of go back and see if the landlord can shave $50 off of the rent, which is ideal. A lot of landlords won't do that. The second option is looking at, are there other funds available to cover that gap in that? Because keep in mind, this is a rapid rehousing program, and rapid rehousing funds can only be used for a maximum of 2 years. So anybody who goes into a rapid rehousing program, you need a good, solid, okay, what's the plan for them to be able to pay this $1,250 a month within a 2-year time period? Ideally, somewhere within that first year, you would hope to be able to transition the cost of carrying that unit to somebody else. So that brings up rent reasonableness. So there's two ways to look at rent reasonableness, and a lot of people forget about one of them. The first rent reasonableness that you have to look at is the landlord may be charging $1,000 a month for this unit. Well, you have to do some comps. You have to try and find, 3 other units that are, in the same zip code or a neighboring zip code that are about the same age, same size, same number of bedrooms, and say, hey, are these 3 other units charging at or about $1,000 a month? If you've got somebody charging $1,500 and somebody charging $700, and you're at 1,000, okay, you're in that realm of reasonableness. But if you have somebody charging $1,000 for the unit you're planning to rent, but all of the others in the area are charging $700 or $800 a month, well, they're over rent reasonableness. They might meet fair market rents, but they're over what the market conditions of their competitors are charging rent-wise that are on the market at the time. So you would not be able to enter into a contract for that unit unless the landlord reduces the rent to become more in line with what is happening around there. So if you had an $800 as what your comps are, and that are 1,000, if they came down to 900, you could probably make a good argument for it if there's, a compelling reason that it's, somewhere in that $800 to $900 range. Sure. $850, probably easier to justify. But the second piece of rent reasonableness that most, my experience has been most people forget about is it needs to be reasonable for the client. So just because HUD says fair market rent is $1,200 a month, and rent reasonableness says, yes, that $1,200 a month, that $1,000 a month the landlord is charging is reasonable. The question comes down to, is there a path for that client to be able to afford this rent of $1,000 a month when the subsidy of rapid rehousing ends sometime within 2 years? And if you have a client who is only receiving disability income of $800 a month, and the person says, I'm never going to work again, well, $800 a month and $1,200 a month of rental payments and utilities is not going to be a reasonable placement for that individual, because you're not going to be able to promise that there'll be a housing choice voucher or some other long-term subsidy prior to financial assistance from the rapid rehousing program ending. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It does. Before you move on, I have a question in the notes document that I'm taking that our case managers can see. And E is curious if you all have recommendations for how best to ask landlords to reduce rent. Because as you said, most often they're going to be like, nah.
So comes down to relationships. It comes down to what level of service are you going to provide to the landlord. My experience talking a landlord down $25 or $50 a month, people are more willing to do that. They're not likely to drop, $100 or $200, which would be 10 or 20% sometimes. But sort of say, hey, keep in mind, the housing providers or landlords are in the business to, one, make money, two, ensure that their asset is well maintained and that there aren't any problems in those assets. So they don't want criminal behavior, police, other issues. They don't want to deal with evictions. They want a good tenant who pays the rent on time. So this is the leverage that you, as the rapid rehousing provider, bring to the table. That nobody coming in to rent that unit is going to come with a backstop. So if, John Smith comes off the street to rent the unit, John Smith is 100% risk to that landlord. Now, John Smith comes with the backing of the LGBTQ Center. The LGBTQ Center can stand behind John and say, hey, John wants to rent this. Would you reduce it $25 so that we can be able to pay this? We're paying a security deposit, first month rent, last month rent. So they're getting potentially 3 months of rent right off the bat, and they still get to collect another 10 months worth of rent. Sometimes you can pay a double security deposit, which would turn into 4 months of rent. And obviously that security deposit needs to be refunded to the tenant when the tenant exits the unit. It doesn't go back to the LGBTQ Center. Having that 4 months rent up front is often enticing to folks because it's like, wow, I've got money in the bank. And if I run into problems, LGBTQ Center is going to be there to work with the person and making a commitment that, hey, if things don't work out and they're not paying their rent and we're still engaged with them, we will work with John to voluntarily leave the unit early, avoiding you having to go file eviction paperwork. We'll help get them out. And as soon as the unit's ready, if you'll let us move somebody out, we can move somebody else back in and try it again. And we'll continue that process so you don't have downtime. If there are issues there, call us. We'll work with the tenant to make sure that, John and his friends, are behaving. And it's a partnership. It's how do you come together and what are the things? And, you'll be doing home visits. You'll be stopping by, checking on the condition of the unit and letting the landlord know if there's something that's broken or repaired before it gets, garbage disposal breaks. And obviously you want to let the landlord know that before it starts flooding everything. A toilet's backed up. You definitely want to make sure that gets fixed before it causes problems. So it's really, what are the things that the LGBTQ Center can sort of offer as a value to the landlord to save them money and make it harder for them to say no? Does that help?
E, did that answer your question? They might not be able to come off mute.
Okay,
Yes, it did. Sorry, I was trying to click back to the screen.
no problem.
Yes, thank you for answering that.
Sure.
It seems unlikely, but with all of those different ways that you suggested to like come into the conversation, seems a little bit more likely. But some of these like agencies, bigger agencies that have so many multiple properties, probably less likely, but who knows?
You are absolutely correct. Corporate landlords, the ones that have a lot of out of town owners, are incredibly difficult to work with from my experience, just because they have a lot of fair housing things baked into their system that, if you don't have a credit score of X, you're automatically kicked out. If you don't have X amount of income, you're automatically kicked out. And a lot of those are from my understanding, a corporate risk management perspective. They've put these sort of hard yes and hard no's in place to avoid being accused of fair housing violations. So they've kind of said, this is what we expect. And if you meet or exceed it, we're probably going to say yes. If there's a criminal history at this, or this, we'll say no. If there's a credit score less than 500 or less than 600, they'll say, nope, credit score's not enough. A lot of the big corporate landlords will
also live in Durham. We wouldn't know anything about that.
Exactly. So a lot of the places that have been very successful that I've seen are the smaller, still locally owned, like the Rick Souls, Leah Bergman properties are owned by local folks that are willing to kind of say, all right, I'll work with you. I'll give you a shot. That second chance housing group. The challenges, sometimes those units aren't as nice as the, corporate units. And that's, the downside of it. The other thing that I've seen that works out well is looking at the shared housing. And if you can find people who are good friends to be able to go rent, instead of getting a 1-bedroom by themselves, finding a 2-bedroom, it will often become more affordable for 2 people to rent a 2-bedroom than it is for 2 people to go find a 1-bedroom. Other ways of looking at this are rooms for rent. That there are people, I don't know how often it happens in Durham, but people who have, an efficiency in their basement or an accessory dwelling unit that they rent out above a garage, or in the backyard, another little apartment like a mother-in-law suite that's not being used that they'll rent out. So sometimes those are really good options that are affordable as well. Folks renting out a bedroom in their house, if they could get a lease as well, would work. Those tend to be pretty, landlords tend to be a little bit more open to some discussion.
Yeah, so our current spaces that we have been using as rentals for the past couple of years are owned by a local older trans woman who acquired a building in an apartment complex, and 3 of her 4 units, which are 2-bedroom townhome units, she gives to us. Now, I am starting to get concerned that the rent rate that we are grandfathered into with her is going to fall way outside of rent reasonableness and fair market rent, because she rents units to us that I think are way below that area's average rental rate.
And that's fine. You can be below the fair market rent. You just can't exceed it. You don't want to exceed it.
Thank you for saying that. I'm going to make sure that's in our notes.
Yeah, it's always better. Like if the fair market rate is 1,200 and you can get the unit for 800, you can do that all day long. And I strongly encourage to come in under fair market rent as often as you can. Obviously, one of the things that you do have to do is there's a basic, and I think Lloyd may have talked about this in the first training he did, the
Mhm.
habitability standards.
Mhm.
Did you guys go through that?
We did, yeah. Well, we talked about it and then we got links to some of the documents to use for it. It's all, I mean, it's also a process that we're familiar with because we do our own version of it already, so.
Okay, perfect. So those are the things that I would say when you get to those lower price points, sometimes the habitability standards may not line up exactly right. So you have to kind of work with the landlord to say, hey, I need you to add a smoke detector to these rooms or whatever it is.
Right.
Colin, if I could add a couple of
Please.
thoughts about working with landlords too. I think this was funded under the DV domestic violence bonus, correct, Casey?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, so I think one of the arguments to make to landlords and property managers too is to be a good corporate citizen and a good community partner, and to acknowledge, that we are working with this project is working with vulnerable people, and you can help us be the kind of Durham that we all want to be, by providing at least opportunities for people coming through this project to, have a chance to deal with a difficult time in their life. And, some corporate, some property managers, I think, and landlords will respond to that kind of invitation as well. Obviously, not all of them will, but it's finding the argument that really makes sense, I think, for the landlord. And that's, again, as Colin said, where the relationship really becomes important.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Lloyd. That particular conversation with landlords is actually one that I myself am quite skilled at because I cut my teeth in housing work by doing emergency housing for domestic violence survivors way back in the day. So it is something that I'm hoping to make sure that E and Gemini and, if needed, Hunter are all comfortable having those conversations. E is, just so you all know, currently our survivorship services coordinator at the center and works with all of our domestic violence clients. And so that's also their expertise, is, advocating for survivorship needs. And so that is definitely relevant to this conversation around, recruiting landlords. And frankly, it was a part of the way we recruited our current 3 units that I mentioned previously, was by pulling at the heartstrings of that landlord. Of course, we were approaching it from a sexual violence survivorship perspective, but it's, to us, victimization is all the same. So
I think that's important that you mentioned that, Casey. You're absolutely right. I think it's also important that you walk that thin line on protecting the tenants who may be victims, because sometimes some landlords may hear victim and assume I'm going to have a whole lot of trouble with, outraged, ex-partners showing up and potentially being violent or trying to destroy a property. So it's that fine line, and needing and figuring out, how do you sell it and what does the person need to hear? There's some people who are like, I don't care about the heartstrings. Show me the money. Show me how you're going to make my life better. And there's others who are like, I'm not really caring about the money. I just want to help certain people. So it's knowing the audience and knowing what do they need to hear to say yes. And sometimes it's a combination of both. It's be a good corporate steward in the community and help some people transition to better housing. I have found that working with landlords, oftentimes when you use the word homeless or transitioning from homelessness to permanent housing, landlords will often get a little squeamish. So what we found is, oh, this person's in a transition period where they're making some moves in their career and looking to, adjust to be closer to work, and kind of leaving out the homeless part that will sometimes scare landlords away a little bit, unless they specifically ask you, is this person exiting homelessness? Then don't lie. But there's sometimes other ways of saying this is a household that's in transition, and coaching that the clients and the tenants to sort of say, yeah, I'm transitioning to a better place and looking for a new place to go and looking to do this and getting some help to do things a little bit differently and be, a new job and a new opportunity and do it that way. So you're not, you're still being honest about what's happening.
Yeah. It's, of all the setbacks in Durham, the cost of living, the gentrification, we are still a progressive city, greatly so. And so those conversations are a lot easier here than, they were where I used to work, right? So like that part is good. And, another thing that I want to just say for the recording, and so Ian Hunter can hear it, is that in my experience, it also helps often to lean into legal statutes. And that is usually more helpful once you've already got them on the hook. But, the best example is emotional support animals, landlords being a little like, oh, wait, I didn't know you didn't have to pay me a pet policy. And I'm like, let me send you this fair market or fair housing legal statute for emotional support animals in North Carolina. And they're like, oh, I guess right, I guess I have to do that. And you're already my leaser, so blah, blah, blah. And, it's the same with VAWA laws for domestic violence survivors. There are certain things that landlords have to do for survivors, and they cannot deny someone because they are a survivor and they're afraid of retaliation by offenders and all of those things. And, so for us, making sure that all of our team are versed in how to have those conversations is, again, I'm saying this for the recording, something we want to continue to do. And it's really changes the relationships that we can have when we can bring evidence to the table. So, and I'm going to have to go on mute for a second, but y'all please continue.
Sure. All right, let's go take a look at the HUD fair market rents, and I'll show you this. I'm going to put a link in the chat that you guys can have access to, and we can email it to you as well. But let me share my screen. All right, can you see this HUD fair market rents screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so we're going to come down here, and the link I sent you will get you to the right place. Right now, we're in the 2022 calendar year that started October 1st, 2021, and will end the 30th of September. So when you get to this site, you would go click here for the fair market rents. You can do one of two things. You can go through and select your state, North Carolina, and then get to Durham. But Durham is part of a metro statistical area, so you can skip all of it and just go down here to find the Durham Chapel Hill area. Right here, Durham Chapel Hill Metro FMR. So click that, select HUD fair market rents. So this shows you what the rate was in 2021, and this is the 2022 rate. So you would use the 2022 rate for now until September 30th, 2022. So you're at $1,199 for a 2-bedroom. And keep in mind, that includes the utility allowance. $1,030 for a 1-bedroom. And an efficiency is $1,024. And if you were renting a bedroom in a house, it's less than an efficiency, but we would have to figure out the calculation of that. There's a couple different ways of looking at it. If you want, we can go pull the 2023 and just kind of see what those numbers look like. Haven't been published yet. So the 2023 numbers will get published probably later this month. Usually it's at least 30 days before, oftentimes they come out sooner than that. So, all right, let's go back over here. And then we'll look at the rent reasonableness, or the, we'll do a sample calculation. The utility allowances are done by the Durham Housing Authority. I'll put a link to this in the chat as well. I'll do that in a minute because I can't do that while I'm showing you this. So let's do a walkthrough. Are you typically, do you think you're going to be renting 1 or 2 bedroom units or 3 or 4 bedroom? I don't know.
Probably 1 or 2.
All right. Which one do you want to do a calculation for?
Let's do a 2-bedroom.
2 bedroom. Okay, so 2 bedroom. So if we remember from our, so our fair market rent is $1,199, right? Now we're going to go over and figure out what our utility allowance will be. So space heating, natural gas, most, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of rental units are not natural gas or propane. A lot of them are electric. So any objection to using electric for our heating source?
Sure. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Okay. But this is, it's important to note because as you look through it, so you have bottled gas, which would be propane. All of these have different numbers. So it's important to know what you're planning to use. So an electric resistance, there's probably an electric heat pump in here somewhere. So an electric heat pump is most commonly used, unless you've got a much, much older unit. So we would be looking at a heat pump for a 2-bedroom. A 2-bedroom, you have to choose. Is it a low-rise apartment, sort of the garden style, where you've got 2 to 4 units, or a larger apartment where you've got 5 or more units? We'll just use it's a larger unit where you've got at least 5 units. Sound good?
Okay.
Or do you think most of them are in the low-rise 2 to 4 units?
I'm thinking about the units we have now, and I'm thinking that they're the low rise.
Okay, so let's do that then, just so we can keep it as accurate to what you're experiencing now. So that's $17. So you write that down. And you keep scrolling through here. We're done with space heating, so we don't have fuel oil, so there's no oil being delivered to the house. Cooking. Well, we're in a 2-bedroom, and we use electric for our cooking. So we're going to add $7 for our cooking electric bill. Then we're going to go down to other electric. This is for all the other little things, charging your iPhone, computers, television, etc. So we're going to add $30. We come down, we keep going. Air conditioning. We're going to add $12 for the air conditioning. So we're in that low rise, right? I can make it bigger if it's easier. Let me keep scrolling down. Water heater. I'm guessing most of the water heaters you guys are dealing with are probably electric, not gas. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think so.
Go down from water heater, electric, 2-bedroom, low rise attached. So we're going to look at $18 that we're going to add to the mix for the hot water heater. And we're not using, so keep looking over here, scroll down to get to the next topic. Now we're going to add our water, sewer, etc. So we're going to add $27 for water, $39 for sewer. There's an electric fee of $16. There's no natural gas in the house, so we don't need to worry about that. There's trash collection of $22. People are going to have a range and or a microwave. If they don't have it, that's going to be a housing quality standard that you're not going to be able to move somebody in until they have a place to adequately prepare meals. And the same with the refrigerator. So you can add that $19 and $22 to the mix in your 2-bedroom. And we keep scrolling down. And that's all of it. So now we're going to add up these add up these 11 numbers. I don't know if anybody's been adding them up as we go along, but I'll add them up real quick. So 17 plus 7 plus 30 plus 12 plus 18 plus 27 plus 39 plus 16 plus 22 plus 19 plus 22. So $229 is the utility allowance. Okay. So now we have to take that $1,199 and subtract $229. That gives you $970. So that means the payment to the landlord on that lease cannot exceed $970 per month. That number could go up if electric was included or if water was included. You would back out, let's say water's included or water and sewer included. So you could add 39 plus 27 and add that. So you'd be a little over $1,000 that you'd be able to bring in, or if trash was included, you would add that back in to your 970 and you could go above. So let's say hypothetically you're at 970. Now let's say, oh, trash is included. So you do 970 plus the 22 plus water and sewer are included in the lease. They're not usually, but let's just pretend they are.
1058.
Yep. So you could have a lease of 1058 and not have any issues. Does that make sense? It starts getting tough to find units at that price point. It's not impossible, but it does get a little trickier. The good news, and I'm going to go back and double check this. We can look at it if I can find it and pull it up. And let me pull this so I can send you the utility allowance. This utility allowance will be good through December 31st of this year, or until they update it. But so you'll need to kind of check these periodically to make sure you're using the most recent numbers. So there you go. There's a link to that. If you exceed the lease amount, let's say the landlord is set and says, nope, I'm charging $1,199. I'm charging $1,200 a month. That's what I need you to pay me. Well, now you got a $1,200 rent plus the $229 utilities, right? So now you're at a total, the tenant eventually is going to need to pay $1,429 per month to stay in that unit approximately. So the good news with COC funds is you're allowed to go above the fair market rent. You're just not usually allowed to use the HUD funds to pay all $1,200. So you could use HUD funds to pay the $970 a month. You could use private money to subsidize the rest of it, or you could allow the tenant to pay what's above the fair market rent, as long as it meets the rent reasonableness standards. Does that make sense?
It does, Colin, and I'm still here, but I'm back.
You're fine.
Now.
You're fine.
Yes, it does make sense.
I'm going to do some double checking on it, make sure that you cannot, that's just my understanding, my recollection off the top of my head, that the COC rules allow you to go above fair market rent as long as it's rent reasonable, and you do not use the HUD funds to pay above the fair market rent. So you could use private money or let the tenant cover that gap. Of course, you would never want to move somebody into a unit that is unreasonable for them to be able to afford when your financial assistance ends.
Right.
So that's the
Or
only caveat.
couldn't afford the gap. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, if they can't afford the gap, they can't afford the whole payment by themselves to begin
Right.
with. If you can afford the gap, there's a chance you might be able to afford everything. But, like I said, it's really a lot of rapid rehousing is really a lot of strategic planning and thinking ahead of time, coming up with what is the budget? What's your housing history? What have you historically been paying for rent throughout the course of your life? Somebody who's never paid rent, somebody who's never had a job, this is going to be a completely foreign concept, perhaps. Somebody who's only paid $100 a month in rent is going to say, well, I expect to pay $100 a month. It's like, okay, let's see if we can find, challenge them. Find me a place that you can rent for $100 a month. They don't exist. Then you start running, okay, well, what is your housing option? What do you want to have? And then start running the hypotheticals of, okay, well, this is what the fair market rent is for this. Back out the utility allowances and doing those calculations and saying, okay, what's your income history look like? Does your income history support, a $1,200 a month payment? If so, you're probably making somewhere between $2,400 and $3,600 a month. And if you are, fantastic. Let's look for this. If you're only making $1,200 a month, you're setting yourself up for an eviction. And what can we do to increase your income, or look for shared housing, or look for some other options? Those are the big discussions to have.
Yeah, yeah. And, again, luckily for us, our case managers are already skilled at those discussions. So
Exactly. So I'm just sharing from my experience, the things that have tripped folks up in the first few months of these that I've done over the years. So I'm glad you guys are ahead of the curve and having those realistic conversations ahead of time, and not setting people up with unrealistic expectations that you're going to have a $10,000 a month penthouse condo in downtown Durham. Like, hey, if you can afford it and you're experiencing homelessness and you're down in your luck and you're going into one of those new Apple jobs paying $185,000 a year, hey, fantastic. We'll get you in, get you set up, and let you rock and roll. And then you can donate back to us to help the next folks.
Right.
Let's see. Okay, rent reasonableness. Now, when you're looking at rent reasonableness, when you're looking for units, Casey, you said that you have a few people you're currently working with, right? Okay. So the easiest thing to do is, if they've got empty units in the same building, that's your kind of gold standard of, well, what are the other units here renting for? And if they're all renting for about the same thing, great. Most of the time, there's one, maybe two units available, but you need three. So you're like, here's my, 123 Fake Street. And then you're going to look up, okay, well, I'm looking for one bedroom apartment. So you could go to apartments.com or another, apartment search complex to see if you can find apartments in the same zip code. Another place that I've used is looking at Craigslist. In another jurisdiction, is kind of looking for what are some other apartments renting for, and trying to do it within like a 2-mile or 5-mile radius of that zip code. If you can't find anything in that zip code, try and find as close as you can. And then you're going to sort of document, it's a 2-bedroom unit. It's on the second floor. They were built around the same age. As close as you can. You're not going to find anything that's exactly perfect. You just have to do some due diligence to say, okay, here's what I found in the area for 2-bedroom apartments, and this is what is being rented for. Print out what you find, stick it in the file, keep it all together. So there's your rent reasonableness, and that you're able to show it. I think Housing for New Hope. Lloyd, did you give them a rent reasonableness form? Do you know?
Yes, they have a form, and we can get that. They typically compare, they do comparables with, I think, 2 or 3 other units.
Yep.
Can't remember what the form has. precisely?
We do not have a form.
We didn't send you a form? Okay. Let me get you a form. And you can create your own if you want to, but I'll see if I can get, Housing for New Hope has one that they use that I think is really easy, and it's probably off the HUD Exchange or something, but we'll get you a form that you can use as a template.
Right.
And it's basically here, it's sort of set up with like 4 columns. And it's your ideal unit is in the left-hand column where it says, you know, what's the address?
What
How
you're
many
gonna rent.
bedrooms? What year is it built? How much is the rent? Are utilities included? Yes or no? And then you have, you know, comparable 1, comparable 2, comparable 3, and they'll ask the same questions, and you answer them as best you can. You know, you're not necessarily having to call every single landlord and say, hey, can you tell me, is this gas or electric? Is this, you know, there's
Right.
pieces that you try and you do the best you can.
Don't overcomplicate it.
to document that you've done some due diligence. And that's really all this is have you done due diligence to show that you're using the public money wisely and landlords aren't artificially raising their rents because they, ooh, hey, I've got a guaranteed payment here. Let me spike my rents for this tenant and I'm not going to raise them for others. That's what we're trying to avoid is landlords finding out there's a fair market rent and they're charging under, and oh, well, hey, I can raise my rent to this group of people, but I don't have to do it for everybody else.
Yeah.
See if I can get that to you.
Dang, I had a question and then it flew out of my head.
No worries.
We can move on.
No, I mean, that's
It'll come back to me.
pretty much the, that's all I've got. I think I've gotten through all of the major stuff I've got.
Okay, great. Oh, I remember the questions. So we currently do not keep any paper files for any of our clientele. Do we need to have paper files for our rapid rehousing clients, or can they exist in HMIS and then, you know, in files in there and all? Like, do we have to have a paper copy of a file?
That is a very good question. And I would say, what is your preferred way of doing it? And then we can go from there.
Non-paper.
Okay. So yes, there is a way to, unfortunately, you're going to have some paper documents because you're going to have to upload them into the HMIS. So a copy of the lease, you would need to upload it into the HMIS, but you would want to hold on to the original and keep it in a paper file. So I think you're going to still have some level of a paper file because it's HUD and you're never going to get away from everything having at least a small paper file. But all of your case management notes, you can absolutely keep in the HMIS. Your documentation of homelessness, you could keep in the HMIS. There may be a point during a monitoring where if we came on site, somebody may ask, HUD may ask, hey, can we see a paper file for these? And you may have to go print all that stuff out. But there's no reason you couldn't keep probably 90% of your documents in the HMIS, and probably 10% you're probably going to have in both places until a monitoring happens.
Okay.
Lloyd, do you have other thoughts on that?
No, I think that sounds good. Yeah.
Well, and you know, I am all for doing what is going to work best for if we do get, you know, audited or site visit or whatever. That's kind of always been my strategy with client work. And so up until now, we have been able to use electronic files only. It may be that we make a different decision so that we could be prepared for those site visits if it happens, because running off to print something is a pain in the butt. So, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to contact Housing for New Hope and ask if they would be able to, if you could do a visit with them and they could show you at least a perhaps a redacted version of their client files, because they have a very well organized hard copy
Mhm.
of their client files. They've been doing rapid rehousing for 10 or more years. So they're solid with the way they've got their client file organized.
Yeah, and we actually have a meeting on the books, Gemini and I do anyway, with their street outreach team in the next couple of weeks. So I may try
Great.
to fold that into that, but thank you for that tip.
Yeah, their files
Okay.
are really good. A lot of it is, having the big things that trip up rapid rehousing providers on a HUD monitoring are copy of the lease, showing that you did your due diligence to calculate the fair market rent. So make sure you document the utility allowance, what's on the lease, make sure you document the rent reasonableness piece. Those are the things that tend to really trip folks up in a monitoring, is forgetting to do the utility allowance. It's like, oh, well, the lease was $11.99 and fair market rent is $11.99. We're good. It's like, where's the utility allowance? Oh, all right. Now we spent too much money and there might be a payback. And then the other piece, the rent reasonableness, people will sometimes forget to do that because the unit might be so far under fair market rent. And I'm speaking from experience because I did this one time. It only took me one time to make the mistake. And that was early on in the rapid rehousing shift, that the units we were renting were well below fair market rent. And it was like, well, of course it's reasonable. And it became a finding on a monitoring that I had when I was running a nonprofit. And we had to put in a corrective action plan and go back and show that they were reasonable.
Gotcha. I just wrote that down, so.
And then the
Yep,
other
you're always
piece.
going to have your documentation.
Yep, documentation. The other thing to remember, and I'm sure Lloyd talked about this and you're already aware of it, is monthly case management is required if you are providing financial assistance. So if you're paying somebody's rent for 4 months, there should be at least 4 case notes, 1 per month, where they're getting that financial assistance. If you don't provide assistance in the 5th month and you don't meet, then that's okay. If they call in the 6th month and say, hey, I need help, then you need to have a meeting and establish why they didn't meet with you in month 5. Why do they need assistance to be able to continue providing financial assistance? But before you close people out, make sure that you've really worked with folks to make sure that, they're not going to need that assistance, because you're not going to be able to reopen them in rapid rehousing to bail them out. So sometimes it's better to keep them open a little bit longer and keep checking in without giving financial assistance in order to be able to step in if needed.
Right. Okay.
So sometimes, it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm good after these first 3 months. Okay, well, I'm going to keep you open. I'm going to check in during month 4, see how you're doing. And then, based on what you're hearing and seeing, you might be like, hey, I'm going to check in with you next month as well. Just make sure you're good. And after 2 months, if they're fine, they're probably going to be okay. And you can go ahead and exit them. But closing somebody too early because you can't reopen them, and there isn't necessarily a prevention backstop to come in and save them. It's sometimes better to continue a phased out approach.
Yeah, thank you for putting that back in the conversation. I had one last housekeeping question. I wanted to open the floor for E or Hunter if they had any last questions, and then I think if you're content, I feel content with our meeting today. So E, Hunter, do y'all have anything?
I don't have anything off the top of my head now. A lot of this is all like a lot anyway. I'm taking it as I can.
Yes.
Feel
My
free.
only question. Oh,
Yeah,
go
please.
ahead. No, my only question is in figuring out the fair market rent, will we have to do this for every unit that we're trying to place somebody into to figure out if it fits the rate or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll do it for every unit, but really you're going to do it kind of a quick one. And, I think off the top of my head, I used 1,200 and 250. Once you do it a couple times and you get used to it, you kind of know. I was off by what, $21 on the utility allowance and $1 off on the rent piece. But it gives you a rough idea that when you're looking at units with your clients, you can sort of say, okay, keep in mind the fair market rent is this. We need to be looking approximately in the $1,000 range or $950 range for a lease. So once you start doing it on a regular basis, you'll kind of know what is going to probably meet that based on just experience of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll formally have to write it all down once you actually start getting into, signing a lease. But you don't necessarily have to do all the math for every single unit you look at. You just need to know, okay, for a 2-bedroom apartment, you're going to want to probably be in the 900 to 970 range, is about the max that you want to go for a lease for a 2-bedroom unit, if everything's electric.
Gotcha.
And Casey, I just sent you the rent reasonableness form
Great.
and a document from HUD regarding fair market rent and the rent reasonableness for the COC program. So,
Perfect.
those documents can help.
Oh, great. Yeah,
then-
I think I already
There's-
did this HUD form, but the form is
Yeah.
helpful.
Okay, yeah, and there's helpful links in that HUD document as well to videos and training materials
Great.
at HUD. Okay,
Um,
excellent.
Yeah, Hunter, Casey, thank you very much. And Lloyd, Ruby, thank you very much. As Hunter, Casey, as you guys are working through all of this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you've got questions. It's much easier to talk it through or get on a Teams call or a phone call to find a solution to questions. And it's easier to work it out ahead of time than a year or 2 years from now, HUD coming to monitor, and then you're scrambling to clean up a whole lot of stuff. So it's better to set it up and get it right from day one than it is to be scrambling on the backside.
I couldn't agree more.
All right.
My housekeeping questions real quick. By
Sure.
nameless meetings, I know Hanalea is no longer with you all. Are those still operating the same with the same link at the same day and time?
We have put a pause on those for a minute while we are trying to figure out how better to use those meetings. But we will make sure that we get that information, I'm guessing, to all 3 of you. And then you guys can decide who's coming or not coming. Ruby, do you have emails for Hunter and E?
If you can just send whatever information to me, it will actually probably just be E and Gemini who come to those meetings. So I don't want to get y'all too confused. So if you want to just keep me as the primary contact, that works fine.
You got it. Then we'll send you the link for the rapid rehousing meetings. But yes, we are working to figure out how to better utilize our rapid rehousing and how better to map and use those meetings so that we're not spending 3 hours a week talking about every single person experiencing homelessness in Durham.
I love that. And then my other housekeeping question, you weren't here when I was sharing with Lloyd that we are still not working on our contract yet. I do think I have some emails from when I was on vacation that I need to go through, but our budget, is that something we do with the Greensboro office, or do we just use what we put in our application as our budget? How do we need to frame that?
Okay, so that's a great question. And you've got rental assistance. What did you put? I don't remember what you put in. You put in rental assistance and supportive services?
Yes.
And admin, right?
We have rental assistance, we have staff salaries, and we have therapy funds, so supportive services and admin. I am planning to go ahead and move that therapy money into a different category before we even start, if it's possible to do that. So that's kind of why I'm asking that question.
Okay, so what we need to do is look at the application that you put into eSnaps.
Mm-hmm.
And So, all right, essentially where you have your staff salaries for case management and your therapy money,
Mm-hmm,
that's all going to fall under the heading of supportive services.
mm-hmm.
Those supportive services, you can kind of move stuff all day long in between all that stuff. At the end of the year, in support, as long as you don't go outside of supportive services, you don't take it and move your therapy money to rental assistance.
Mm-hmm.
You can move money. You can take, oh, we didn't need this therapy money. We need more staff money. You can pay your staff.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to do is if you said you needed therapy money and you want to move it to food, let's say, well, we need to look in eSnaps, and there was I think there's like a checklist of things of here are services, who's providing these?
Right.
Is it the applicant, a partner, or somebody else? So essentially right now, you could pay anything that you say you're going to be doing, you could use money for those. If you say that food is being provided by a partner agency, it's a little dicier. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you may need to have like a contract in place to pay a food vendor to do it versus you going out and buying food and providing it yourself.
Yeah,
As
and
an
I
example.
by this, yeah, with the money movement would be to the salary line. So it would be pretty straightforward, it sounds like.
Yeah, you should
Yeah.
be fine on that.
Cool.
Yeah,
One other-
we'll just
One other point, Casey, regarding that budget issue is that the grant award that HUD provided was more than you applied for because typically HUD adjusts those awards based on the FMRs that it has put in place after you submitted the application, right? So any difference between what the amount you applied for and what HUD actually awarded should be seen as in the rent assistance line item.
That makes total sense. So then again, the last point of the question is, do you all need that budget? Does Greensboro need that budget? Like, where do we do those movement?
Greensboro, my understanding, and Colin can chime in the grant agreement, I think you're going to have that budget stated in those various line items, and that within those line items, you can move things around.
It'll actually, your grant agreement will say, here's how much rental assistance you have. That will be the only number that will increase.
Okay.
Your supportive services number will stay the same and your admin number will stay the same.
Okay.
So, and I found it once how HUD does this calculation and it's really confusing. It's not like a straight 2.5%. It's like a really convoluted math system that they use to adjust that leasing item. That rental dollar amount will go up. You've told HUD you wanted to start the program August 1st, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got your 25% match. You can go ahead and start your program using your match money now, and you can start billing HUD when that grant agreement comes through. My suspicion is they will be coming shortly. Friends of mine who are in Fairfax are just getting their grant agreements from the DC field office. So I suspect Greensboro is probably working through it and will probably be coming shortly. They all kind of end up coming from all the field offices around the same time.
Yeah, I do see where this email that I haven't gotten to yet says grant agreement in the subject. So
Great.
There you go.
yeah,
Very
so
good.
that's great. That's great to hear. Yeah, I appreciate you all kind of giving me some
Right then.
tips on all that, and I'll I have your numbers. I'll be in touch if I have any other questions.
Very good.
You got it. Anytime.
All right.
All
Thanks
right.
so much.
Thank you all.
Enjoy the
Thanks,
evening.
y'all, for all this
Thanks,
info.
guys.
You got it.
And-
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Is Ruby, are you gonna be able to send the recording?
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much, Ruby. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ruby.
Thanks all.
Bye,
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
y'all.
Bye, everybody.